In every Minecraft world, there are points in time where you hit big milestones that push you a little bit farther forward. And I'm so excited to say that today is one of those days. Today on the Bedrock Guide, we're going to do a deep dive into the world of enchantments. And after getting that enchantment on my pickaxe a few streams ago, I gotta say, oh, things are about to get good. So let's not delay any longer. Let's get started. Before we dive into enchantments, I need a place to store my enchanting setup. And I think right about here would be a good spot for it. It will double as an entrance to our XP farm, which if you know anything about enchanting, experience points are huge and necessary. So it's a good thing it's gonna be nearby. But I'm really excited about this build and this space because it is going to be a reimagining of a build I never got to finish on a previous season of the guide. This build is going to be the tallest thing I've built so far in this world. And so before I could get started, I needed to head to the jungle to get some bamboo. I took that bamboo and some string and combined it to make scaffolding. This will allow me to easily scale up and down the building as it gets taller and taller. Starting at ground level, I built a ring of cobbled deep slate to outline the shape and provide a foundation for this enchanted tower. I built up the foundation a couple of layers and then decided to add in some similar blocks for texture variety. I also added the entrance to the tower, which included a staircase made out of stripped dark oak logs and deep slate brick stairs. Next, I added a temporary ring of dirt along the inside of the tower. This allowed me to create depth in a few ways. Not only is the next layer of blocks pushed back, it's also a different texture and color. And not every column of stripped logs ended up at the same height. Instead, I created a staggered look to provide some vertical depth as well. Next, I added another temporary dirt ring around the inside of the stripped log layer to recess a few layers of deep slate bricks, also adding some texture variation along the way. While the first couple of sections were pushed back into the build, on the next set of layers, I decided to push the blocks forward. This was a little bit tricky because I used stripped logs again, and stripped logs are directional. I wanted all of them to be vertically facing, so I had to strategically place dirt under where each pillar of logs started. After finishing the next layer of dark oak logs, I moved on to building a large bay window. Continuing with the deep slate and dark oak theme, I built out a couple of supports that would hold the window. Using deep slate walls, I outlined the floor of the window and then added some dark oak to outline the doorway. But before moving on to the roof, I wanted to build up the walls where the roof would intersect. This next section of walls would introduce a new color palette to this build. So I headed to a lush cave to grab some moss blocks, and then onto the desert for some sand and cactus, and then the branch mine for some gravel. I smelted the cactus into green dye and combined it with the sand and gravel to create green concrete powder. Using a combination of moss, concrete, mossy, and regular cobblestone and stone, I created a gradient effect that made it look like this tower was once smooth, but has been overgrown as the years have passed. After completing the next layer of walls, I moved back to the bay window to finish off the roof using a combination of deep slate for the outline and spruce, oak, and birch planks for the inner part of the roof. With the bay window completed, I repeated the pattern of deep slate bricks, dark oak logs, and the green to gray gradient, adding 3 additional layers to the tower. And finally, I built a massive cone-shaped roof with another gradient effect, only this time using wood tones. At this point, the main part of the exterior is done, aside from a few details. So I carved out a few windows of varying shapes and sizes. I also added some trim made out of fences and some large vines made out of a variety of leaves. And things were going pretty well until... Oh no! This makes like 6 times that I've fallen now to my death, and I also got a creeper hug earlier, so it's going about as planned. Well, the exterior is finished, and while I made some improvements on the original design, I still needed to work out an interior. I never got to build an interior on the original tower, so I made the most of every space possible on this one. Starting back at the bottom, I made the floor out of birch slabs to contrast against the dark walls. And then I created a solid spiral staircase made out of deep slate bricks. With every texture change of the exterior wall, I added another floor made out of birch slabs. And once I completed every floor layout, I added in some new chiseled bookshelves to store enchanted books and barrels to store lapis. And finally, I added some lighting to keep the monsters from spawning. And that brings us to here. I am back at my AFK fishing farm after falling off the tower a bunch of times. I needed to get some levels for what's next, and I'm hoping 63 63 levels is enough to get me through today, but I guess we're just gonna have to see. Now that I have the enchanted tower, I need the ability to actually enchant things. I'm gonna take a bunch of sugarcane and craft paper, and then I'm gonna take some leather with that paper and create books. And with 2 diamonds, 4 obsidian, and 1 book, I'm going to create my first enchantment table. I also need to take these books and planks and create 15 bookshelves. And honestly, that should be all I need to get it started. One thing I wanted to mention before we get going with the enchantments is this bottom layer right here. This is not finished. I've got something good in mind for this in the next episode, because the entrance to my skeleton farm is actually below this floor. I have a really cool idea of how we're gonna get down there. So just hang tight. That's coming soon. But as I make my way up to the top level here in the enchanted tower, I'm gonna take my bookshelves and I'm going to place them in a bit of a square pattern. In the very center of these 15 bookshelves, I'm gonna place my enchantment table. You should see all of these little symbols flying off the bookshelf and going to the enchanted book on the enchantment table, and that means that this is working. When I open up this enchantment table to the enchantment interface, you'll notice right away there are 3 brown slots. In each of these slots will appear an enchantment option, which we'll get to here shortly, but each of them will represent a level of enchantment, and in order to get maximum level enchantments, you have to have 15 bookshelves. If I take this brand new pickaxe and toss it right into the enchantment table slot, you'll notice the 3 enchantments pop up right away. If I hover over each of these enchantments, it will show me the first possible enchantment in each of these options, and honestly, none of these are any good. But you'll notice an enchantment at level 6, level 13, and level 30. If I block off some of these bookshelves with torches, these bookshelves are actually no longer accessible to the enchantment table, and will therefore change the level of our enchantment. I now have a level 2, a level 5, and a level 18 enchantment. I've added a 16th bookshelf here, and you'll notice that it didn't really change our results. 15 is the maximum number of bookshelves that you need to get maximum level enchantments, and you really don't need to go over that number. If you're like me and you don't like any of the results of these enchantments, you can always try a different tool or something like a book. But from here, I can actually just start cycling through to see what options are available. I think I'm okay with knockback 2 on this sword. Now, just because it says knockback 2, that doesn't mean there's not any other enchantments available to be applied on this sword. But before I enchant this sword, there's a couple other things you should know. On the left-hand side of these enchantments, you'll see a 1, 2, or a 3 with a little experience orb right next to it. I have 63 levels right now, and so if I choose the first enchantment for this sword, it's gonna cost me 1 enchantment level and take me down to 62. This would take me down to 61, and this one would take me down to 60. For every experience point cost of these enchantments, you have to place the equivalent number of lapis in the enchantment table. If I only place 1 lapis, 2 and 3 are not available. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on this knockback 2 enchantment and see what else might be on this sword. And that's it. That's not great. In the event that you got an enchantment you don't really like, you can take the grindstone workstation, toss in your enchanted item, and it will disenchant that item and give you back a little bit of XP. Now, I started at 63 and I ended up at 60, so that's not gonna give you much back from disenchanting items, but it will now clear that for me to go and enchant it again if I so choose, which I'm not gonna do because that's not very good. But I'm gonna start cycling through these again to see what we can get. Fortune 3 is pretty decent, but I'm looking for something else on that. Unbreaking 3 for the crossbow seems pretty good. What else might we get? Piercing 4. Okay, I can live with that. So basically, I'm gonna cycle through all of my tools and armor and weapons until I get the enchantments that I want, or am close to it. I've been enchanting for a while and making pretty decent progress, but one thing I wanted to point out was this. I'm now under 30 levels. I only have 27 right now, which means I do not currently meet the minimum requirements to get this 3rd enchantment. In order to get the first one, you need 9. To get the second one, you need 19. To get the third one, you need 30. With 15 bookshelves, the 3rd enchantment is always going to be 30 points. Even though it only costs you 3 points to get, you have to have level 30 to even get the enchantment in the first place. So, you know what that means. I guess it's time to make use of the skeleton farm. After literal hours of enchanting, I finally have all of my tools, my normal weapons, and then some, an entire set of armor except for the boots, which we'll get to in a second, and a few extra items, fully enchanted, or mostly enchanted. Now, let's talk about these boots. Every once in a while, you're going to get to a point where you get the enchantment table to give you the one enchantment you're looking for, which here is Protection 4, but it didn't give me anything else. I don't want to sacrifice that Protection 4, so I'm going to take these books right here and combine them so that I can get Unbreaking 3 and Feather Falling 4 on the same book, and then I'll combine that with this next book to get Depth Strider 3 and get all of those on the same enchanted book, and then apply them to my boots. Minecraft has this really weird mechanic called too expensive. If you use the anvil too many times, either to combine or repair or enchant, whatever it is, your stuff will get too expensive to actually do anything with. So basically, combine all of your enchanted books before you add them to your tools. Just make sure you're not getting to that point where it's too expensive. So we've talked about the basics of enchanting and how to get enchantments on your tools, armors, whatever it is. What do these enchantments do for you once you have them? I've broken down my enchantments into 4 different categories, and we're gonna start with tools. There are some enchantments that you can use on literally every tool, every weapon, every piece of armor, whatever you have. There are some enchantments that apply to everything. And there are some enchantments that apply only to certain categories, like tools, and then there's even enchantments that apply specifically to one item. We'll talk about those along the way, but let's get a broad brush stroke with the first enchantment being Unbreaking 3. Unbreaking 3 can be literally applied to everything that can be enchanted. I don't think there's a single item in the game that can't use Unbreaking 3. If that is not correct, please correct me in the comments. I would love to know. But basically everything important that you're gonna be using is gonna have Unbreaking 3. This enchantment will allow your tools or armor or weapons or whatever it is to last longer than if they didn't have this enchantment. What it does is every time you use that tool, for example, the pickaxe, the enchantment has a chance to trigger, which would save the tool from using up durability. So if you want your stuff to last a long time, get yourself Unbreaking 3. The next enchantment that applies to literally everything except for one thing that we'll talk about here in a few minutes is Mending. Mending is a fantastic enchantment and was a game changer when it was introduced years and years ago at this point, but every time you use a tool or you take damage on your armor, you're going to use up some durability. If you have a place in your world, like my skeleton farm for example, that provides you with XP, when you hold that tool in your hand and gain XP, the Mending enchantment will allow that item to be repaired back to full durability. Something to keep in mind though, you can't actually get Mending from an enchanting table. I got mine from fishing. You can also get it from librarians and sometimes in loot chests, but it's one that you're going to be hard pressed to get early on in the game. So just be patient. You might have to wait a little while for Mending. This next enchantment applies only to the tools category and technically could go on, I think, shears here, but the next enchantment is Efficiency. Not only do we have an enchantment to make our tools last longer, an enchantment to repair our tools once durability gets low, we have an enchantment that allows our tools to work quicker. So whether you're digging through a branch mine or chopping down a tree, Efficiency is going to save you time on those activities by chopping things a lot faster. Now, one important thing to note about Efficiency 5, that is the max level of efficiency that you can get, but if you try to get it from an enchantment table, you're never gonna get it. The maximum amount of efficiency that an enchantment table will give to you is Efficiency 4. So you're asking, BluJay, how did you get Efficiency 5? Well, that's a great question. We can come over here to the anvil, and I have 2 books here that both have the equal number of enchantment. This is Efficiency 4, this is Efficiency 4. The output will give us an Efficiency 5 when we combine these 2 books. If one of these happened to be Efficiency 3, it would do nothing. It would just give us another Efficiency 4. But combining 2 equivalent level enchantments will bump it up to the next level, assuming there is another level to go to. There is no Efficiency 6, so this is the max that we're gonna get. The next one is really interesting because we actually have 2 different options to choose from. Fortune 3 and Silk Touch are known as mutually exclusive enchantments. You cannot have a pickaxe that has Fortune 3 and Silk Touch on the same tool. And that's honestly for good reason. When you go to mine something like an ore, Fortune will increase the number of ore that you get when you mine that block. On the flip side, if you're mining an ore with Silk Touch, it will keep that original ore block intact and not give you the actual drop. So you can see why these 2 are mutually exclusive. They can't be used together because they do totally different things. Both are actually really important, which is why when I first enchant tools in my world, I actually get get one of each for pickaxes, and then I kind of pick and choose on the rest. For my shovel, I use Silk Touch because that's going to allow me to mine a lot more gravel, because when you mine gravel, it has a chance to break and give you flint, and I don't really want that sometimes. I really just want the gravel block. Silk Touch will guarantee that I get that gravel block every single time. If I move down here to my axe, you might notice one additional enchantment that's not present on any other tool. This is because the axe can actually double as a tool and a weapon. Smite 5 will not work with any other tool, but it will work on an axe and a sword. I've chosen to put Smite 5 on my axe because it is a mutually exclusive enchantment with one other one that's gonna go on my sword, and I'll explain that here in just a minute. But basically what Smite 5 does, it will increase your damage output to undead mobs, things like zombies, skeletons. So that's basically all of the enchantments for tools. Let's talk about weapons. Weapons are a little bit different than tools. In fact, tools are kind of the only category that mostly has universal enchantments across the board, except for a couple of unique ones. Weapons, on the other hand, they share some in common. For example, Unbreaking 3 and Mending, like we already talked about. But basically, every single one of these weapons has their own set of enchantments. Sharpness 5. This is the one that I was talking about with the axe that is mutually exclusive with Smite 5. You cannot have both on the same weapon, so you kind of have to pick and choose. I typically choose to put Sharpness on my sword because of this next enchantment, Looting 3. The combination of those two enchantments together just makes sense. So for example, I've got a cow farm. If I go over to my cow farm with a Sharpness 5 sword, it's gonna basically take out a cow in one hit, and it's going to increase the number of drops that I get every time I defeat a cow. This is a pretty good combination, and that's what I would recommend. Maybe you do things differently when you enchant your gear, and that's totally fine. This is where a little bit of opinion comes into play. There are actually a few more enchantments you can put on the sword that I've chosen to leave off for now. There is Knockback 2, which actually pushes mobs back farther every time you hit them. I generally just don't like this enchantment, and that's personal preference. If you like it, feel free, go ahead and throw it on your sword, and you're good to go. The next one is Fire Aspect 2. Fire Aspect 2 will light any mob on fire upon impact with the sword. So if you hit a cow with Fire Aspect and it catches on fire, when that cow is defeated, instead of dropping raw meat, it's actually gonna drop cooked meat. So there is actually a good reason for putting this on there, and honestly, one of the only reasons I leave it off of mine is when we get to the end at some point, there are these mobs called shulkers. If you catch them on fire, they kind of like to teleport away, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get the drops that they have, which are vitally important for the end game. So I just kind of deal with no Fire Aspect on my sword. If you like it, go ahead and toss it on there. The infamous bow is next on our list, and earlier we talked about how you should put Mending on literally everything except for one item in the game. This is a controversial topic for good reason. There used to be a time where you could get Infinity and Mending on the same bow, but they made those mutually exclusive to where you cannot have both at the same time, which is very sad because they're actually both really great enchantments. With a Mending bow, you can basically do what I talked about with the other stuff. When the durability gets low, you can repair it with XP. Infinity is my preferred enchantment because you only have to carry around one arrow, and you will never run out. You can see that I've got 17 arrows in my inventory right now. I can actually just toss those other 16 out, and the Infinity bow, we'll treat it like there's an infinite number of arrows. If I was using Mending, I would only get 17 shots on this bow before I run out, and the bow is useless until I go grab more arrows. A bow with Unbreaking 3, if you're careful, can last you months and months and months at a time, and there are ways that you can repair the bow without having to get a brand new bow every time, but eventually, because of that too expensive mechanic that we talked about, you're gonna have to toss the bow and get a new one. That is the only downside that I see with this enchantment, and honestly, it's worth it to me. The next enchantment is Flame 1, which is basically the exact same thing as Fire Aspect, just on your arrows. I just noticed as well, this bow has power 4 on it. Hold on, and now it's got power 5. Power 5 is like Sharpness, but for arrows. It basically increases your overall damage, and Punch 2 is exactly like Knockback, but just for arrows. These last two weapons are ones that I have either rarely or never used. I've literally never enchanted a crossbow before this episode, and now that I have one, I really kind of want to try it out for a while and see what it's like. I'm not an expert on this one at all, so maybe you guys can leave your favorite enchantments for this in the comments section, but the crossbow has a few unique enchantments as well. This particular crossbow crossbow, I enchanted with Piercing 4. Piercing 4 will allow you to fire an arrow through multiple mobs. So if they're all kind of lined up in a row, you've got a couple of zombies attacking you, you'll be able to shoot through them and hit multiple. That's kind of cool. It's unique to the crossbow and gives it some value that a regular bow won't give you. Where the crossbow falls a little bit short is in the drawing process. When you draw the crossbow, you have to draw it until it locks in place, and then you fire the arrow. With a bow, you kind of just pull back and release, and you don't even have to pull back all the way on the string before you can release the arrow. Quick Charge 3, it decreases the time that it takes to draw that string back, allowing you to fire the weapon a little bit quicker. The last enchantment for crossbows that I do not have currently on this one is MULTISHOT. This is mutually exclusive with Piercing 4 and allows you to fire 3 arrows at once. Obviously, you can also have Mending on this one, but I don't have any more Mending books, and at this stage in the game, they're honestly pretty hard to get a hold of. Last but not least, for weapons, we have the Trident. In addition to Unbreaking and Mending, the Trident has some unique enchantments, the first of which is Impaling 5. This is basically like your sharpness or your power, but it's a little bit more unique. Impaling increases the damage output for mobs that are in rain or water, so it's a little bit more specific and kind of meant to be used in an aquatic situation. The cool thing about a Trident is that it can serve as a melee weapon like a sword or a ranged weapon like a bow. You can actually throw Tridents. The only problem, when you throw it, you actually have to go pick it up until you get this next enchantment. Loyalty 3 will allow you to throw your Trident and it will automatically return back to you. This is basically like the infinity of Tridents. Honestly, pretty cool enchantment. And last but not least for this particular Trident is Channeling. Anytime there is a thunderstorm and you throw a Trident with Channeling, it will actually strike lightning on whatever you throw it at. So this is a great way to farm charged creepers. No idea why you'd want to do that, but you can do it. There is one more enchantment that's mutually exclusive with Channeling and Loyalty, and it is called Riptide. Riptide basically allows you to rip through the water every time you throw it, kind of like your Aquaman. It's pretty cool. Whew, that's a lot of information. You guys still with me? Okay, let's move on to armor. Armor is a little bit of a weird mix between tools and weapons as far as their universal and exclusive enchantments go. Just like everything else, Unbreaking 3 and Mending anytime you can get it, and then you have your various types of protection enchantments. There are 4 different types of protection, and the one I've chosen for my first set of armor is just the generic Protection 4. This will decrease the damage you take anytime you take damage. Where it gets a little bit more specific is with these mutually exclusive enchantments. We have Blast Protection, which will decrease the amount of damage you take from explosions, Projectile Protection, which will decrease the amount of damage taken from projectiles, and Fire Protection, which will decrease the amount of damage you take from fire and lava. All of these types of protection are honestly pretty important for different aspects of the game, so eventually you're going to get several different armor sets to accommodate for each type of protection. The last universal enchantment for armor that I want to talk about is called Thorns 3. With the Thorns enchantment, anytime you take damage from a mob, that mob will also receive damage as well. Honestly, I rarely think to put this enchantment on my armor. Maybe that's something I'm going to have to try out too. Now we get into the unique enchantments per armor piece. On the helmet, I have 2 unique enchantments. Both of them have to do with water. Respiration 3 is pretty much what it sounds like. It allows you to breathe longer underwater. AQUA Affinity will actually allow you to mine things faster while underwater. If you didn't know, when you're underwater, you actually mine slower than you do on land. This enchantment speeds that process up. You might notice I don't have anything else on my chest plate. It's because chest plates are kind of boring. You know what would make chest plates great? If you could combine them with your elytra so you can wear both at the same time. I know we're not to that point in the game yet, but come on, guys. Wouldn't that be great? Let me know in the comments who wants a chest plate elytra. I do. And same thing for the leggings. I've got Protection, Unbreaking 3. Eventually, we'll get Mending. The only exclusive enchantment for the leggings is found in the Deep Dark. I have not been there yet, and we're not going quite yet, but it is Swift Sneak. Every time you sneak or crouch, you move a lot slower. With Swift Sneak, you move at pretty much normal speed. As soon as I can get my hands on that enchantment, we're gonna put it on the pants, and it's gonna be great. And last but not least, we have the boots. You'll notice I have one more aquatic type enchantment on here, known as Depth Strider 3. Depth Strider 3 will allow you to move faster through the water, because without it, you move kind of slow. The combination of Depth Strider Strider, Aqua Affinity, and Respiration makes you an aquatic champ. And I pretty much put these on everything that I have. And last but not least, this would have saved me so much hassle earlier in the episode, Feather Falling 4. Feather Falling 4 will allow you to fall from a lot higher heights and reduce the amount of damage that you take. So when I fell off my tower earlier, I might have survived. If you're like me, get yourself Feather Falling 4. Honestly, we're pretty much through the major stuff. These last few enchantments are just to show you that you can. If you have a shield, you can apply something like Unbreaking 3. Same thing with shears, same thing with flint and steel. There are a few other items in the game that you can enchant that I don't have access to yet. For example, the elytra, we talked about it just a brief amount. We're gonna be going to the end eventually in this world, so I will get an elytra at some point, and at that point we'll talk about the enchantments for that, but sneak peek, it's Unbreaking 3 and Mending. But guys, I think that's gonna do it for today. I hope you learned a lot about enchantments. If anything confused you about it before, I hope this episode cleared some things up for you. I'm sure there's some things that I left out. If you have anything to add, be sure to leave it in the comment section, as I would love to hear your best enchantment tips and tricks. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're new, and hey, don't go anywhere. There's more Bedrock Guide content on the way.